I'd lived as Tessa Morgan, 22, a financial analyst thriving in Seattle's damp pulse, my auburn hair cascading past my shoulders, emerald eyes cutting through ledgers, freckles dotting my nose like a faint galaxy. Life had sparkled with promise. My job paid well, my apartment stood as my own fortress, fully funded by me, and Ethan, my boyfriend of 3 years, loomed lanky beside me with chestnut hair, a scruffy jaw, hazel eyes that once anchored me. But that night at Lila's birthday bash, everything shattered. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, softening the loft's edges when I spotted him. Ethan tangled with a stranger, their lips fused as if I'd vanished. Rage flared inside me, a furnace swallowing my chest. "Out!" I bellowed, my voice cracking the air like lightning. I shoved him toward the door, his plea, "Tessa, it's not what you think," swallowed by my fury. Guests froze, wine glasses tilting, as Lila's eyes darted away when I stormed past her. I didn't care. I slammed the door, the fairy horn wailing faintly beyond Seattle's drizzle. 2 weeks later, I'd withered. My skin paled to ash, my hands shook over spreadsheets, work a desperate shield against the pain. "Tessa, you okay?" my boss asked, his voice distant. I wasn't. Ethan's betrayal lingered, a sour fog in every corner. Worse, Lila wouldn't answer my calls. I'd dialed her relentlessly, her silence slicing deeper. Had she known? The question festered as I paced my hollow apartment, its walls taunting me with echoes of him. I couldn't stay. Willow Creek beckoned, the house Dad willed me when he passed, a lifeline tugging me free. I packed a bag, each zip loosening the knot in my gut, but as I locked the door, Lila's absence gnawed louder. Why wouldn't she answer me? Seattle had twisted into a trap after Ethan's betrayal, its sodden streets tightening around me like a vice. I'd barricaded myself in my apartment, a space I'd forged with my own grit, its stillness now an abyss that devoured every whisper. Work turned into my lifeline. I slouched over my desk, digits dancing across the screen like frantic fireflies, my auburn hair snarled from restless nights, emerald eyes clouded with weariness. "You're slipping, Tessa," a coworker murmured, her words tinged with concern. I flicked a hollow smile, brushing her off, the coffee scalding my lips, a jagged thread holding me together. Ethan's laugh echoed in my skull, a taunt I couldn't shake. 2 weeks had slithered past since that night, each hour draining the light from my world, leaving my skin sallow, my hands quivering. Then my phone jolted me awake. Old Mr. Hargrove from Willow Creek rasped, a gruff voice I half remembered. "Your house looks lived in, girl." My pulse spiked. Dad had entrusted that place to me alone, a haven carved in his will, sacred and untouched. A spark flared, faint but fierce, cutting through the haze. "I'm done here," I growled, my voice raw as torn earth. I crammed clothes into a bag, each fold unraveling the vice around my lungs, Seattle's skyline dissolving into a wet smear beyond my window as I twisted the lock shut. Willow Creek called, its cedar-shadowed peace a salve I ached for, Dad's quiet strength tugging me homeward. Yet a chill crept in. I'd poured my soul into this city's pulse, shaped a life here, only to see it fracture. Now my refuge, my last anchor, bore signs of trespass. Who'd dared to invade it? The question simmered as I crossed the threshold, the elevator's drone fading into a mournful hum behind me. I craved truth, and the road ahead stretched out, a dark ribbon weaving into the dusk. After hours on the road from Seattle, Willow Creek greeted me with gravel rasping under my tires, the air heavy with cedar musk as I pulled up to Dad's house. My inheritance, a sagging 2-story shell draped in flaking gray paint. I stepped out, boots kissing the sodden ground, craving the peace I'd imagined, but the front door flew open with a groan that snapped my nerves taut. Diane strode out, my mother, 48, lean with silver-streaked dark hair lashing the wind, her hawkish blue eyes pinning me like a specimen. "Tessa?" she snapped, her voice a shard of ice splitting the stillness. Victor hulked behind her, her new husband, a broad slab of a man with a buzzed scalp catching the sun's glare, steely gray eyes raking over me like claws. 2 figures flanked them, my step-siblings. Sophie, 16, grinned, her white blonde strands shimmering like ice, violet eyes glinting with sly delight, while Leo, 14, slumped, chestnut curls swaying, his pout a sour twist. "You're here?" I choked, my throat tightening. Diane's mouth curved into a smirk. "We've taken root. Pay rent if you want a spot." My chest buckled, a weight crashing through me like a felled tree. "It's mine," I fired back, clenching my fists, Dad's will a blazing shield in my mind. Victor crossed his arms, his bulk a barricade. "Prove it then," he growled, his words a low rumble of threat. Disbelief surged, a bitter wave drowning my hopes. This wasn't the haven I'd pictured, not the embrace Dad had woven into his last whispers. They'd defiled my refuge, their arrogance a fist to my gut. Diane's stare sharpened, a vulture circling carrion, and I felt the earth tilt. What waited in Dad's locked office? That room held his legacy, perhaps my fight, and I burned to find out. The cedars sighed, their murmurs goading me as I stood firm, my suitcase a silent sentinel beside me. Fury simmered inside me, a molten thread weaving through my veins as I stood beneath Willow Creek's twilight, the cedars etching crooked shadows across the cooling earth. "This is my house," I asserted, my voice a tempered steel edge slicing through Diane's grimace. She chuckled, a noise sharp and brittle as twigs snapping in a chill. "Your dad's dust, Tessa. Claims fade." Victor stepped closer, his bulk a towering crag against the dimming horizon, steely gray eyes gleaming like freshly forged iron. "Fork over rent or vanish," he growled, his words a coarse boulder rolling toward my defiance. I gripped my keys, their ridges pressing into my skin, and pushed past them, my boots striking the floor in a resolute cadence toward Dad's locked office. The door creaked open, exhaling a stale gust laced with the tang of old parchment, shelves groaning under piles of brittle papers. I plunged into the clutter, my hands rifling through after a frantic shuffle, urgency knotting my stomach like a drawn bowstring, until my fingers seized the will, its script a solemn pledge crowning me sole heir. "Got it," I murmured, a flare of victory igniting my chest. Diane slipped in behind me, her shadow stretching across the worn planks, her hawkish blue eyes glinting as her lips twitched with disdain. "That's mere scrap," she sneered, her voice a venomous whisper threading through the stillness. I saw through her ruse, her denial as fragile as glass under a hammer. I'd brandish this truth, a beacon to shatter their grip. Night cloaked the house in a deep hush, the cedars outside rustling with a furtive sigh, and as I secured the lock, a shape darted beyond the window, a fleeting wraith lost to the gloom. Who watched from the cedars? My heart thudded, a restless rhythm pounding in my skull, the will a talisman pressed against me. Uncertainty gnawed at me, a relentless current wearing down my edges, as I held the will in Willow Creek's dim office, the night folding around the windows like a heavy shroud. That shadow from before had melted away, yet its presence hovered, a puzzle rustling through the quiet. I ran my fingers along the will's creases, its texture firm against my skin, and found a creased note slipped inside, Dad's rough script unfurling across it. "Guard this house, Tessa. Trust Henry." My breath snagged, a swift wind stirring my core as questions sprouted. Who was Henry? Morning bled through the panes, brushing the room with a faint gleam, and I strode out, the will a standard lifted bold. "This seals it as mine," I declared, dropping it onto the kitchen table before Diane, my voice a strung bow quivering with resolve. Her hawkish blue eyes wavered, a fracture in her steel facade. "You'll regret this." Victor edged closer, his steely gray gaze smoldering with threat, while Sophie let out a sharp snicker, her violet eyes glinting with spite, and Leo's pout tightened, his chestnut curls trembling as he shifted. I withdrew to the office, locking it fast, my thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a gale. I rummaged through remnants, snapshots curling like old parchment, titles crisp as fallen twigs, until a brass key tumbled free, its sheen a silent enigma in the clutter. A rustle snapped me alert, the cedars outside murmuring in the breeze, and I peeked through the slats, my pulse racing, my neck prickling with unease. There he loomed, a weathered figure with white hair sparse in the dawn glow, amber eyes piercing me from the tree line, his faded jacket melding with the timber. Ally or threat? I clasped the key, a tether to Dad's hidden truth, as his stare bore through the glass. What did Henry know? The query flared, a ember pulsing in my blood, urging me toward answers. Courage flared inside me, a molten spark igniting my core, as I clasped the brass key in Willow Creek's dawn stillness, the cedars rising like ancient keepers of buried lore. That stranger's amber stare had etched itself into me, a flare piercing the early mist, and I hurled the door wide, my boots crushing the dew-laden turf. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice a taut bowstring loosing its arrow. He raised a calloused hand, his white hair catching the sun's first rays. "Henry, your dad's ally. I've got evidence." We entered the house, the air ripe with the tang of aged timber, and he slid a stack of letters across the table, their edges worn like whispers from a bygone age, exposing Diane's falsified papers to escape debts that chained her. My stomach knotted, a web of barbs tightening around my lungs as I surged into the kitchen. "You've spun deceit from the beginning!" I bellowed, thrusting the letters at Diane, my words a deluge shattering her facade. Her face warped, a shield of disdain cracking under fury. "You're a selfish ingrate!" Victor lunged closer, his hulking form a tempest brewing wrath, his steely gray eyes scorching. "Back down, or you'll pay dearly." Sophie smirked from the corner, her violet eyes twinkling with venomous mirth, while Leo shifted uneasily, his chestnut curls swaying, his pout stiffening into a glare. I stood unyielding, my frame a bastion tempered by will, no longer their quarry. Diane's debts laid bare her plot, her grip on my house a frantic bid to stave off collapse, but I'd cut that cord. Twilight cloaked the house in a soft gloom, the windows dimming, when a sudden flare danced beyond the glass, a crimson tongue tasting the dark, and my breath sharpened as smoke stung my nostrils. Why did it burn? The query roared within me, a blaze searing my mind, as I steeled myself for what loomed ahead. Tenacity surged within me, a steadfast flame pulsing through my blood as I lingered in Willow Creek's kitchen, the sharp sting of smoke weaving through the cracks from that dusk-fed blaze outside. Henry's letters shivered in my grip, their tattered rims a mute hymn to Diane's betrayal, and I dashed out, the cedars rising like grim sentinels under a sky bruised with twilight hues. Flames twisted in a barrel, gnashing at papers with a vicious snap, and Victor loomed over them, his massive form a stark ridge against the fire's glare, steely gray eyes flickering with ruthless purpose. "Those are her secrets crumbling," Henry whispered at my side, his white hair dusted with ash in the swirling breeze, his voice a deep current of resolve. I fished out my phone, dialing Nora, a lawyer I'd met yesterday in town, 35, her sleek black waves framing slate eyes that radiated quiet strength. "We've got them," she confirmed, her words a solid keel steadying my turmoil. "Bring it all to me." Victor pivoted toward me, his bulk a roiling tempest of threat, but I anchored myself, my stance a granite ledge braving his fury. Sophie hovered near the porch, her white blonde locks shimmering like a veil of malice, violet eyes glinting with shrewd intent, while Leo prowled, his chestnut curls tossing, his scowl curling into a calculating sneer as they murmured. "They're brewing trouble," Henry cautioned, his amber gaze tightening, and I felt their spite threading, a snare tightening around me. Diane's debts had kindled this firestorm, her forged papers a flimsy dam against collapse, but I'd carve justice with allies by my side. The blaze swelled, a feral jaw rending the night, its heat biting my cheeks, my throat tightening with the scorch. What flared in that blaze? My heart hammered, a fierce tide slamming my chest as I held the letters, my bulwark amid the embers. Alertness burned through me, a honed edge carving my instincts, as I stood in Willow Creek's yard, the barrel's flames throwing a frenzied shimmer over the cedar's twisted branches. Smoke wreathed upward, a pungent veil pricking my vision, and I sprang forward, wielding a shovel to choke the fire, its heat searing my palms. Scorched fragments spiraled loose, their blistered ink unveiling Victor's shoddy leases, a tattered web of lies spun to prop up Diane's debts. "You're done!" I hissed, my voice a flint shard sparking resolve as I shoved the remains at Victor. His massive frame barreled toward me, a landslide of rage, steely gray eyes flashing with venom, but Henry stepped in, his lean form a resolute dam, amber eyes unwavering. "The law will bury you," Henry rumbled, his words a deep tide slicing the murk, and Victor shrank back, his snarl fading into a bitter oath. I gripped the salvaged scraps, their charred rims a banner of truth breaking free, and handed them to Nora the next dawn, her slate eyes glowing with steady purpose as she launched the eviction claim. Diane's forgery lay in ruins, her frantic grasp on my house a fortress of sand, but I'd forged a sword from their cinders. Midnight swathed the house in a dense quiet, the cedar's murmurs blending with the stars, when a firm knock pierced the silence, a steady beat rattling the door. My pulse raced, a turbulent stream flooding my chest, my hand trembling as I edged to the frame, their whispers fading in the distance where Sophie and Leo had skulked. Who knocked at this hour? The query loomed, a phantom weaving through my mind as I clutched the knob, the night's frost creeping along the grain. Victor's blaze had scorched their deceit, yet a fresh enigma beckoned, a pulse of mystery drawing me onward. Expectation pulsed through me, a tight cord thrumming in my ribs as I hovered at Willow Creek's door, the midnight chill seeping through the wood after that urgent knock. The cedars beyond stood like somber guardians under a canopy of stars, their boughs scraping the void, and I turned the knob, my breath catching as the hinges groaned. Henry crossed the threshold, his white hair shimmering in the porch's dim glow, amber eyes alight with intent, his worn jacket rustling softly. "Your dad hid more," he declared, his voice a firm wave breaking the quiet, and gestured to a safe nestled under the stairs, its steel surface winking in the shadows. I wielded the brass key from the office, its cool weight steadying my grip, and the lock snapped free, unveiling deeds and a letter, their ink a bold chorus of Dad's will, sealing Diane's theft in stone. My resolve surged, a column forged in clarity, as dawn poured molten light through the panes, igniting the papers in a radiant blaze. Diane erupted from her room, her silver-streaked hair a tangled storm, hawkish blue eyes wild with dread, and bolted past, a suitcase thudding behind her. "You'll choke on this!" she wailed, her voice a splintering cry of ruin, my fists clenching as triumph swelled like a rising sea. Victor swore, kicking the wall, his heavy tread quaking the boards, while Sophie and Leo slunk after, their faces pinched with bitter surrender. Victory coursed, a current lifting my soul as I cradled the proof, a citadel built from Dad's faith. Then a harsh clang tore the calm, a metallic shriek reverberating from the shed, its walls shuddering in the morning stillness. My pulse spiked, a fierce torrent rushing through me as I gripped the letter, the safe's treasures firm in my hold. What shattered out there? The enigma blazed, a spark flaring in my mind as I steeled for the storm's next breath. Foreboding gripped me, a coiled root snaring my insides as I lingered at Willow Creek's door, the dawn's amber gleam faltering beneath that shed's piercing shriek. The cedars thrust skyward, their rugged peaks slashing a canvas of soft coral, and I bolted out, my boots hammering the sodden ground toward the din. Smoke surged from the shed, a thick veil spiraling upward, and Sophie sprang from its gloom, her white blonde hair flaring like a torch, violet eyes sparking with vicious glee. A gas can toppled at her feet, its acrid stench biting the air, while Leo hovered near, his chestnut curls jostling, his smirk a twisted blade of rebellion as he twirled a matchbox. "You'll have nothing left," Sophie jeered, her voice a shrill blast tearing through the mist, and I charged, pushing her aside, my hands quaking with rage. The shed's heart roared, flames gnawing at Dad's weathered tools, their metal bones buckling in the blaze, a spiteful scar on my haven. Henry dashed up, his white hair whipping in the gust, amber eyes fierce, and stomped the fire's fringe, his calls a firm keel amid the uproar. "They're desperate," he rasped, his chest heaving. And I turned, my knees buckling as I saw my car, its tires shredded, rubber drooping in tatters. My lungs seized, a tempest raging within me as I faced their vengeance, a last lash from a beaten enemy. Nora's eviction hung like a scythe, ready to cleave their grasp, yet Sophie's fire cut deeper, a blow to Dad's memory. Midday cloaked the house in a subdued sheen, the cedars draping weary silhouettes, when Henry nodded toward the road, a siren's wail keening through the calm. My pulse pounded, a fierce rhythm resounding in my skull, as I stood among the ruins, the deeds a bulwark in my clutch. Who approached now? The uncertainty flared, a ember glowing in my mind as I readied for the endgame. Solace bloomed within me, a warm current soothing my taut spirit, as I stood in Willow Creek's yard, the midday sun crowning the cedars with a radiant veil amid that siren's swelling cry. The shed's charred shell loomed, a stark monument to Sophie's malice, and I pivoted, my boots grinding cinders as two officers stepped from their cruiser, their badges flashing like unwavering oaths. Sophie stiffened, her white blonde hair a frantic torch, violet eyes flaring with caged wrath, while Leo cowered, his chestnut curls sagging, his smirk melting into a tremble of dread. "You're under arrest," one officer snapped, his voice a keen edge carving through the strain, and cuffs snapped tight, locking their wrists as my breath steadied, relief unfurling like a long-held sigh. Henry advanced, his white hair gleaming in the sun, amber eyes resolute with retribution. "I summoned them," he revealed, his words a tranquil stream cutting the discord. I gripped the deeds, their heft a lighthouse of Dad's unyielding trust, and Nora strode up, her sleek black waves glinting, slate eyes shining with victory. "Eviction's final. They're finished." Diane and Victor had vanished, their debts a snare they couldn't outrun, and now Sophie and Leo met their reckoning, their sabotage a hollow echo of defeat. The house rested serene, its aged beams basking in restored calm, the cedars swaying like quiet sentinels of my triumph. A soft wind bore the tang of burnt timber, a fading whisper of their fall, and I entered, my tread sure on the floors Dad once walked. Peace enveloped me, a gentle wave lapping at my soul as I brushed the walls, their weathered lines a chronicle of struggles overcome. Then a rustle pierced the hush, a branch snapping among the cedar's limbs, subtle yet insistent. My heart stirred, a faint ripple troubling my ease, as I paused, the deeds a steadfast anchor in my palm. What lingered out there? The curiosity glowed, a soft spark in my mind, as I embraced the stillness I'd reclaimed. Contentment wove through me, a golden thread mending my frayed edges, as I stood in Willow Creek's yard, the afternoon sun cloaking the cedars in a luminous mantle. The shed's burnt skeleton stood mute, a relic of strife now stilled, and I drifted toward it, my boots rustling the dew-kissed blades, the air sharp with the scent of fresh beginnings. That rustle in the trees had softened, a mere sigh rustling the leaves, and I grinned, my fingertips grazing the deeds, their worn folds a monument to Dad's steadfast spirit. The house loomed at my back, its aged bones singing with quiet fortitude, the walls whispering tales of endurance carved in every knot. Sophie and Leo had vanished, their malice tethered by law, while Diane and Victor faded into the abyss of their debts, leaving only peace in their stead. Nora had rung earlier, her voice a clear bell over the line. "It's yours, Tessa. Done." Henry tarried close, his white hair aglow in the sun's embrace, amber eyes warm with quiet honor, and murmured, "He'd smile at this." His words a soothing balm washing over me. I dipped my head, my heart rising with a serenity I'd clawed to hold, the echoes of betrayal and flame now a faint ripple. The cedars stirred, their boughs knitting a tapestry of repose, and I crossed the threshold, my steps firm on the boards, my fingers tracing the grain as memories flickered in the wood. I paused, opening a window, the breeze sweeping in with a bird's bright song, its melody threading through the calm. Renewal called, a tender summons lifting my gaze, as I pictured new varnish gleaming on the beams, voices echoing through the halls once more. My pulse flowed, a calm cadence anchoring my hopes, as I clasped the deeds, a heritage rekindled in my hands. What future blossomed here? The thought danced, a gentle flame in my mind, as I welcomed the dawn of a life restored.